June 22nd, 1941, 3:15 in the morning. Along a frontier stretching nearly 2,000 miles from the frozen Baltic coast to the Black Sea, 3 million men stand in the darkness, waiting. The largest invasion force ever assembled in human history. 4,000 tanks, 7,000 artillery pieces, 2,000 aircraft, all aimed at one target, the Soviet Union. In a few hours, Adolf Hitler will unleash Operation Barbarossa, the most ambitious, most brutal, and most catastrophic military campaign of World War II, a gamble so vast, so reckless, that it will decide the fate of nations. Within 6 months, German armies will advance 600 miles into Soviet territory, encircle entire armies, and come within sight of Moscow spires. And within 4 years, that same Wehrmacht will lie in ruins, crushed beneath the weight of Soviet vengeance, its cities burning, its soldiers dead or captured, its Führer corpse in a Berlin bunker. Historians have called Barbarossa many things. Hitler's greatest blunder, the turning point of the war, the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. But how did it come to this? How does a dictator at the height of his power, master of Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals, decide to invade the largest country on earth? What made him believe he could win? And why, despite early victories that stunned the world, did Operation Barbarossa become the graveyard of the Third Reich? To understand how we got here, we have to go back to the beginning. The seeds of Barbarossa were planted long before the tanks rolled east. In fact, they were planted in Adolf Hitler's mind decades earlier, in the pages of a rambling, hate-filled book written in a Bavarian prison cell. The year is 1924. Hitler, in prison after his failed beer hall putsch, is writing Mein Kampf, his political manifesto, and buried within its pages is an obsession that will shape the future of Europe, Lebensraum, living space. Hitler believes that Germany's destiny is to expand eastward, to conquer the farmlands of Poland, Ukraine, and Russia, to enslave or exterminate the Slavic peoples, and to build a vast German empire stretching to the Urals. It's not just strategy, it's ideology. Hitler views the Slavs as unmentioned, subhumans, and the Soviet Union as a Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy that must be destroyed. For him, war with the USSR is not just inevitable. It is necessary. It is the war that will decide whether Germany becomes a world power or withers into insignificance. But for now, in the 1920s and 30s, that war is a distant dream. Hitler is too weak. Germany is disarmed, impoverished, humiliated. The Soviets are far away. And so Hitler bides his time, rebuilding Germany's military, remilitarizing the Rhineland, swallowing Austria and Czechoslovakia. And then in 1939, he makes a deal with the devil, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. August 23, 1939. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, sworn enemies, sign a non-aggression treaty. To the world, it's a shock. But both sides know it's a lie, a temporary truce. Stalin buys time to rebuild his purged military. Hitler buys time to knock out the West. And it works. With his eastern flank secure, Hitler invades Poland on September 1st, 1939. Britain and France declare war, but they can't save Poland. Within weeks, the country is crushed between the Nazi and Soviet war machines. And for the next year, while Germany smashes Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France, Stalin watches from the sidelines, devouring eastern Poland, the Baltic states, and chunks of Finland and Romania. By the summer of 1940, Hitler is master of Western Europe. France has fallen. Britain stands alone, battered and besieged. The war, it seems, is nearly won. But Hitler isn't satisfied. He looks east, and he remembers the promise he made to himself all those years ago. The Soviet Union must be destroyed. In July 1940, with France barely conquered, Hitler orders his generals to begin planning an invasion of the Soviet Union. They are stunned. The war in the West isn't even over. Britain is still fighting. The Royal Navy controls the seas. The Luftwaffe has failed to win the Battle of Britain. And now Hitler wants to open a second front? But Hitler's mind is made up. He lays out his reasoning. Britain, he believes, is only fighting on because it hopes the Soviet Union will eventually turn against Germany, destroy the USSR, and Britain will sue for peace. More than that, the Soviet Union is weak. Stalin's purges have gutted the Red Army. In 1937 and 1938, Stalin executed or imprisoned tens of thousands of experienced officers, leaving the military crippled and demoralized. The disastrous Winter War against Finland in 1939-40 exposed Soviet incompetence for the world to see. Hitler is certain the Soviet Union is a house of cards. One good kick, and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down. And so, through the winter of 1940-41, the plan takes shape. It is codenamed Operation Barbarossa, after the medieval German Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, who led crusades into the East. The objective, a lightning war blitzkrieg that will annihilate the Red Army in a matter of weeks, capture Moscow, Leningrad, and the industrial heartlands, and knock the Soviet Union out of the war before winter. 3 army groups will drive into Soviet territory. Army Group North will strike through the Baltic states toward Leningrad. Army Group Center will smash through Belarus and drive straight for Moscow. Army Group South will sweep through Ukraine, capturing the breadbasket and the oil fields of the Caucasus. Supporting them, over 3 million German soldiers, plus another million from Germany's allies, Finland, Romania, Hungary, Italy, even Spain. It is a coalition of fascism, united by hatred of communism and lust for conquest. But there are warning signs. Some generals expressed doubt. The distances are vast. The roads are poor. Soviet industry is far to the east, beyond the Urals, where German bombers can't reach. And then there's the weather. Everyone remembers Napoleon's invasion of Russia in 1812. Everyone knows what happens when you fight Russia in winter. Hitler waved these concerns away. There will be no winter campaign. The war will be over by autumn. Meanwhile, on the other side of the frontier, Stalin is in denial. Throughout the spring of 1941, intelligence reports flood into Moscow. Soviet spies, British intelligence, even German defectors warn that an invasion is imminent. But Stalin refuses to believe it. He is convinced it's a British trick, a provocation designed to drag the USSR into war. He orders his commanders not to provoke the Germans, not to mobilize. When border units report German movements, he forbids them from taking defensive positions. Even on the night of June 21st, 1941, hours before the invasion, Stalin is still clinging to hope. Trains loaded with Soviet grain and oil continue rolling west into Germany, honoring trade agreements. Stalin, the paranoid dictator who trusts no one, has made the fatal mistake of trusting Adolf Hitler, and Hitler is about to betray him in the most devastating way imaginable. June 22, 1941, 3:15 a.m., the largest artillery barrage in history shatters the dawn. All along the frontier, German guns roar to life. Shells scream over Soviet positions, tearing apart bunkers, barracks, airfields. Minutes later, waves of Stuka-dive bombers shriek down out of the sky, obliterating Soviet aircraft still parked on runways. By noon, the Luftwaffe will destroy over 1,200 Soviet planes, most of them on the ground. And then the ground shakes. Panzer divisions, Germany's armored spearheads, surge forward. Infantry floods across the frontier. The blitzkrieg has begun. The Soviet response is chaos. Red Army units, caught completely off guard, scramble to respond. Communications collapse. Officers have no idea what's happening. Some units fight back ferociously. Others disintegrate in panic. And Stalin, waking to the news in Moscow, is paralyzed. For days, he seems unable to comprehend the scale of the disaster. He vanishes from public view, reportedly suffering a nervous breakdown. And the Wehrmacht advances. Fast. Within a week, German pincers close around entire Soviet armies. At Minsk, 300,000 Soviet soldiers are encircled. At Smolensk, another 300,000. At Kiev in September, the Germans trapped 665,000 men, the largest encirclement in military history. These soldiers, exhausted, starving, abandoned, either die fighting or march into German captivity, where most will perish from starvation, exposure, or execution. By the end of 1941, the Soviet Union will have lost over 3 million soldiers, killed, wounded, or captured. It is a catastrophe beyond imagination. But as the Wehrmacht drives deeper, something unexpected happens. The Soviets don't collapse. Yes, they're losing battles. Yes, entire armies are being destroyed. But the Soviet Union is vast. For every army the Germans encircle, another army rises behind it. Factories in the Urals churn out new tanks. Boys and old men are handed rifles and sent to the front. Stalin, recovering from his shock, begins to rally the nation. He abandons communist rhetoric and appeals to Russian patriotism, to the defense of the motherland, and the Soviet people respond. Meanwhile, the Germans are beginning to feel the strain. The distances are staggering. Supply lines stretch hundreds of miles across primitive roads that turn to mud in the rain. Tanks break down. Fuel and ammunition run short. The Luftwaffe, which dominated the skies in the west, is stretched thin trying to cover a front that now spans 1,000 miles. And the Red Army, though battered, is fighting back with ferocity the Germans didn't expect. Soviet soldiers fight to the death, defending every town, every river, every forest. Partisans ambush supply convoys. The war is becoming a brutal, grinding slog. And then, in late July, Hitler makes a decision that will haunt him. His generals beg him to focus everything on Moscow. Capture the Soviet capital, they argue, and the Soviet Union will collapse. But Hitler overrules them. He orders army groups sent at a halt and sends forces south to help encircle Kiev. It works. Kiev falls, and the Germans win another stunning victory. But it cost them weeks. Precious weeks. And Moscow is still out there, waiting. By the time the Germans refocus on Moscow in early October, the weather is turning. October 2nd, 1941. Operation Typhoon begins. The final push for Moscow. Hitler is confident. Once the capital falls, the Soviet Union will crumble. Stalin will flee or die. Germany will have won the war. For the first weeks, it seems like it might work. German panzers encircle another 650,000 Soviet soldiers near Vyazma and Bryansk. The road to Moscow is open. By mid-October, advance units are within 60 miles of the city. Panic grips the Soviet capital. Government officials evacuate. Civilians flee. Looting breaks out. For a moment, it seems Moscow will fall. But then the weather changes. The autumn rains begin. Not a drizzle. Torrential downpours that turn the Russian roads into rivers of mud. The Germans call it Rasputitsa, the muddy season. Tanks sink to their turrets. Trucks bog down. Horses drown in the muck. Supply lines collapse. Soldiers wade through waist-deep slime. The advance grinds to a halt. And in Moscow, Stalin stays. He refuses to evacuate. On November 7th, he holds a traditional military parade in Red Square, even as German shells fall on the city's outskirts. It is an act of defiance that electrifies the Soviet Union. If Stalin is staying, then Moscow will stand. The Germans, meanwhile, are suffering. They have advanced 600 miles in 5 months, farther and faster than Napoleon ever did. But they are exhausted. They have no winter clothing. Hitler, convinced the war would be over by autumn, didn't bother to supply his troops with proper coats, boots, or gloves. As the temperature plummets in November, German soldiers freeze. Engines won't start. Weapons jam. Men lose fingers and toes to frostbite. Thousands die from the cold. And the Soviets keep coming. Stalin has been preparing for this moment. All summer and fall, divisions from Siberia, tough, experienced troops used to brutal winters, have been traveling west. Stalin held them back, waiting for the right moment. And now, as the Germans falter in the snow, he unleashes them. December 5th, 1941. The Soviet counteroffensive begins. It comes as a complete shock. The Germans thought the Red Army was finished. Instead, fresh Soviet divisions smash into their overstretched lines. German units, freezing and undersupplied, break and retreat. For the first time in the war, the Wehrmacht is in full retreat. Hitler, in a rage, orders his troops to stand fast. No retreat. Fight to the death. The order saved the army from total collapse. but at a terrible cost. Thousands of German soldiers are encircled and destroyed. Entire divisions are shattered. By the end of December, the Germans have been pushed back up to 150 miles from Moscow. The offensive has failed. Operation Barbarossa is over, but the war is just beginning. The failure to capture Moscow in 1941 is the first great turning point. But Hitler refuses to admit defeat. He fires his top generals, takes personal command of the army, and prepares for a new offensive in 1942. This time, the target is the South, the oil fields of the Caucasus. Without oil, Hitler knows Germany cannot win the war. And so, in the summer of 1942, Army Group South drives deep into southern Russia. At first, it seems like a repeat of 1941. German panzers race across the steppe. Soviet armies retreat in disarray. But then, Hitler makes another fateful decision. He splits his forces. Part of Army Group South will continue toward the oil fields. The other part, the Sixth Army, under General Friedrich Paulus, will capture a city on the Volga River, a city named Stalingrad. What begins as a quick detour becomes an obsession. Hitler demands Stalingrad must fall. Stalin, seeing the symbolic value of the city that bears his name, orders it defended to the last man. And so, through the summer and fall of 1942, two armies tear each other apart in the ruins of Stalingrad. It is one of the most savage battles in human history. The fighting is street by street, building by building, room by room. Soldiers grapple with knives in the dark. Snipers hunt each other through rubble. The city burns. The Volga runs red. And neither side will give up. Then, in November 1942, the Soviets spring a trap, Operation Uranus. Soviet armies smash through the weak Romanian and Italian forces protecting the German flanks and encircle the entire Sixth Army. Over 250,000 German soldiers are trapped in Stalingrad. Hitler orders Paulus to hold. No retreat. He promises resupply by air. But the Luftwaffe can't deliver enough food, ammunition, or fuel. The men begin to starve. They freeze. They die by the thousands. On February 2nd, 1943, Paulus surrenders. Of the 250,000 men encircled, fewer than 6,000 will ever see Germany again. Stalingrad is more than a military defeat. It is a psychological catastrophe. The myth of German invincibility is shattered. The German people, for the first time, begin to doubt they can win the war. And the Soviet Union, bloody but unbroken, begins to push back. Through 1943 and 1944, the Red Army advances. At Kursk, in the summer of 1943, the Germans launch one last great offensive and are crushed in the largest tank battle in history. After Kursk, Germany is on the defensive. Forever. The Soviets liberate Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic states. They cross into Poland, Romania, Hungary. Behind them, they leave a trail of devastation. Cities destroyed, villages burned, millions dead. The war on the Eastern Front is total. It is merciless. It is a war of annihilation. And as the Red Army closes in on Germany, the full horror of Nazi crimes is revealed. The death camps, the mass graves, the millions murdered in the Holocaust, in partisan reprisals, in scorched earth retreats. The Soviets see it all, and they do not forget. By the spring of 1945, the Soviet Union is poised to deliver the final blow. Over 6 million Soviet soldiers mass on Germany's eastern border. They have come 1,500 miles from the gates of Moscow to the gates of Berlin, and they have not come to liberate. They have come for revenge. April 16, 1945, the Battle of Berlin begins. Soviet artillery, over 20,000 guns, pounds the city. Waves of Soviet infantry storm forward. The Wehrmacht, now a shadow of its former self, throws old men and boys into the line. They fight with a desperation born of terror, knowing what the Soviets will do if they break through. But it's hopeless. The Red Army is unstoppable. They fight their way through the suburbs, into the city center, toward the Reichstag. Hitler, hiding in his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, rants and raves, ordering phantom divisions to counterattack. His orders are ignored. The war is over. on April 30th, 1945, as Soviet shells crash above him. Adolf Hitler puts a gun to his head and pulls the trigger. A week later, Germany surrenders. The price of Hitler's gamble is beyond comprehension. 27 million Soviet citizens are dead. Soldiers and civilians, men, women, and children. Entire cities are ruins. Farmlands are devastated. The Soviet Union has bled more than any nation in history. But Germany has paid too. Over 4 million German soldiers died on the Eastern Front. More than 80% of all German wartime losses. The Wehrmacht, once the most feared military on earth, is annihilated. Germany itself is divided, occupied. Its cities bombed to rubble. Its people starving and homeless. And all of it, every death, every atrocity, every wasted life, can be traced back to that single decision in 1941. The decision to invade the Soviet Union. So was Operation Barbarossa Hitler's biggest mistake? The answer is yes, but it was more than a mistake. It was the inevitable result of Hitler's ideology, his hatred, his delusion that Germany could conquer the world through brute force and racial supremacy. He believed the Soviet Union was weak. He was wrong. He believed the war would be over in weeks. It lasted 4 years. He believed the Slavs were subhuman. They fought with a courage and tenacity that eclipsed anything Germany could muster. Operation Barbarossa didn't just fail. It broke the back of Nazi Germany. It turned the tide of the war. It ensured that the Third Reich, which Hitler boasted would last 1,000 years, would barely last 12. And today, the ghosts of Barbarossa still haunt us. The mass graves, the burned villages, the millions murdered. The scars left on Eastern Europe have never fully healed. The memory of that war, brutal, total, pitiless, reminds us of what happens when tyrants dream of empire. In June 1941, Adolf Hitler unleashed hell. And in the end, hell consumed him.